It was a normal, boring morning, driving home from the night shift at the factory. Bleary-eyed and half asleep, I drove home, unable to wait for that moment where I would get home, crawl into bed next to my wife, and the second my head would hit that pillow, I'd just drift off into sleep. It had been a rather uneventful night at work where I again just kind of went through the motions. To pass the time on my 45-minute drive home, I would usually turn on the radio and listen to some music, except for the fact that I had trouble finding a good station. I mean, there were plenty of channels to listen to that, typically played a vast array of music that I enjoyed, but they were all seemingly all that commercial, selling life insurance, roofing services, and medication that I didn't need. I was starting to lose hope, figuring that this may end up being a pretty silent ride home. Then I came across a rather peculiar AM station, AM 1060. Strange, I thought, that in all my years of driving home, early morning, pursuing the radio for some tunes, I had never come across this particular station, or ever even heard of it for that matter. It didn't start off being all that unusual. In fact, it started off with some pretty solid classic rock, Led Zeppelin, to be exact. The station was kinda grainy, typical for AMs, but it wasn't unbearable, so after Kashmir finished, a DJ who didn't identify himself brought a guest to talk about several current events. Now, talk radio isn't really my first choice, but, whatever, I thought. There isn't really much of anything else on, and after they're done talking, it'll be right back to the rock, right? Well, this night would prove to be the first of many nights in which I had a strange encounter with AM 1060. After about 15 minutes of mostly unengaging talk about politics, the broadcast was interrupted by a set of 3 short beeps, followed by a couple of seconds of static. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, a monotone voice began to read off names and dates.
John Telfair, born November 14th, 1953. Date missing, January 9th, 1992.
That was weird, I thought. What was the purpose of that?
Joanne Wilkerson, born March 11th, 1937. Date missing, August 2nd, 2001.
Who are these people?
Jerome Castar, born December 3rd, 1984. Date missing, September 6th, 1999.
After the third and congruous missing persons report, there was again a low rumble of static, followed by those 3 beeps, then it went back to normal. After that, I just turned the radio off and drove the rest of the way in silence. I just couldn't shake what had just happened. I mean, it had to be some kind of mistake, right? Some sort of radio interference, or maybe just some elaborate prank. I don't know. I mean, if it was a prank, who were they attempting to prank at 5:30 in the morning? The next day at work, the previous night's events were still fresh in my mind, and I decided to ask some coworkers if they've ever heard of AM 1060. They all said that they hadn't and that they mostly kept FM stations. Then they chided me for being an old-timer, whilst reassuring me that they all lived in the present. Whatever, I thought. It was probably nothing anyway. 5 o'clock rolled around quickly that night. I clocked out, hopped in my truck, and began to drive home. I listened to my regular rotation of rock radio stations that night. Rocked out to some good songs. Even heard some Martha Hoople. Haven't heard them in a while. However, curiosity got the better of me, and I went searching for AM 1060. So I flipped over to the AM stations and tried to find it, but for some reason I couldn't. I went through several times to no avail. I found AM 1040, which was pretty much just static, and AM 2000, which turned out to be a country station, but no AM 1060. I scanned all the radio stations 4 times over, but still nothing. Oh well, I thought. Switched back to the FM stations and rocked out the rest of the way home, not really thinking too much else about it. Just a fluke, I figured. Later on that day, I asked my wife if she had come across the mysterious radio station. She just gave me a confused look, and understandably so, since in our 20-plus years of marriage, I had never just asked her about an AM station out of the blue like that. She inquired as to why I asked, and I just played it off with some coy response about how it played some of the music she liked. She shrugged it off and thanked me for the suggestion. It was about a week before I had my second encounter with AM 1060. Just like the last time, I was driving home from work in the wee hour of the morning, searching for a radio station to listen to. I couldn't seem to find much of anything I wanted to, so while sifting through the radio stations, I stumbled upon it again. In the middle of its spiel, I heard the same nearly robotic voice chanting off names and dates.
Armando Gonzalez, born July 18th, 1982. Date missing, April 23rd, 2013.
Why are these being broadcast? Is it an effort to find these people? I mean, if so, don't we need a little bit more information than that?
Vaughn Davis, born February 4th, 1911. Date missing, October 13th, 1945.
1945? What are the odds that person is even still alive? I mean, is that person honestly still being searched for?
Sophia Andujar, born January 1st, 1995. Date missing, January 1st, 2013.
Interesting.
Maria DeVierkane, born June 29th, 1963. Date missing, November 28th, 2007.
Right after the last date was mentioned, the radio station crackled back into its regular broadcast. It sounded like the same DJ as last time, talking to a guest, but this time about recent economic issues. And I gotta say, when it's not rattling off names, birthdays, and the dates that people went missing, it's actually a pretty boring station. When I woke up from my after-work nap at around 10 a.m., I decided to try out my amateur sleuthing skills. I went and got my wife's laptop, opened it, and began Googling the names that I heard on the radio. First, I looked up AM 1060. To my surprise, they had a website. I clicked on the link, and after a bit longer than usual, a 404 error message displayed. Figures. I tried refreshing the page several times. Not sure what good I thought that was going to do. I quickly gave up on that venture and went on to Google the names. The first name I typed into the search engine was Maria DeVere Kane. And sure enough, there she was. She was in fact born on June of 1963 and last seen in November of 2007 in Helena, Montana. Helena, Montana? I mean, that's nowhere near here. What are the odds that someone who went missing in Montana is all the way down here? And do they really think that someone down this way has any details about her whereabouts? I have so many questions. Next, I looked up John Telfair. Again, the information that I had on him was in fact correct, but he too was from an area I would assume was well outside the range of AM 1060. Seriously, what is this? After looking over their stories, as well as several others, I compiled some information on them and realized that all of these missing persons cases were from places that weren't particularly close by, with the exception of one guy who disappeared from a few towns over. I also noticed a certain and very interesting synchronicity with these cases, all of them disappearing while driving. Even Jerome Castar, who wasn't even old enough to have a driver's license at the time of his disappearance, and their last known whereabouts were usually places they frequented, places such as their home or work. So they were just going about their normal daily lives, then vanished without a trace. Were they all going somewhere? Or worse yet, running from something? My wife then entered the kitchen, where I was sat doing my research. She asked me what I was doing, seeing that I had several tabs open and was looking up old articles. I came up with some excuse about being interested in true crime and having heard about some missing persons cases that were exceptionally enthralling. She then pointed to one of my tabs and asked why it was open. Stupid me. I forgot to close out the website for AM 1060. I told her that I had been listening to it on the way home and heard about some contest they were having, in which the winner would get 2 free tickets to see Lady Gaga, and that I was trying to win them for us. She thanked me, gave me a kiss on the cheek, then headed out the door to go to work. It would be nearly a month and a half before I came across AM 1060 again. And I mean, to be honest, I had pretty much forgotten about it altogether. This time, however, was different from the previous 2 occasions in that I wasn't on my way home from work this time. Rather, I had just left my house, on the way to a camping trip with a couple of my old high school buddies.
Sheila Gaston.
I heard the voice over the radio say.
Born September 12th, 1970. Date missing February 29th, 2004. George Wellingsworth. Born unknown. 1604. Date missing unknown. 1655.
What? They kept records of that kind of thing back then? I mean, also, there's no chance that guy's alive.
Jeffrey Morris Jr. Born August 21st, 1993. Date missing May 27th, 2031.
Hold on. 2031? I mean, that hasn't even happened yet. Did they just misspeak? Was it a typo, perhaps? Or does the station just predict the future now, too? I mean, at this point, I'd believe just about anything. Once at our campsite, my friends and I had a relatively normal weekend. We fished, drank, and Sat around talking about your standard fare guy stuff. You know, women, sports, that kind of thing. But I couldn't stop thinking about this whole thing with that radio station. So finally, after several beers, I asked any of my friends if they had heard of AM 1060. Greg said that he thought he may have seen a billboard for it off the highway once, but other than that, minor contribution. Nothing else was said about it that night, and I let it be. The following morning, however, was a different story. While on a hike through the woods, my friend Terry took me aside and asked me what I knew about AM 1060. I told him that it was a classic rock station I liked, that occasionally had some interesting talk segments. He looked at me with a raised eyebrow, an overall suspicious look on his face. I could tell he didn't fully believe me. When he spoke again, he told me that he thought he was familiar with the radio station, but not because it played good music, but more so because of a former coworker of his. He used to be really obsessed with the same station, which he found odd because he could never find it in his car. I mean, no big deal, I thought. I can't always find it myself. I asked him what happened to his coworker. He said that he didn't know, and that the guy just kinda stopped showing up for work. That certainly made me think. I mean, I sure hope I wouldn't end up like that. Terry then voiced his concern that he believed something nefarious was at play. I told him not to worry and that everything would be okay. I wasn't that into the station. I just liked their assortment of classical rock songs, was all. Terry then brought something else to my attention, which was that while he thought it was anything but abnormal to like a radio station that played the kind of music you liked, his former coworker claimed to really like its selection of old-school hip-hop, not rock. I just figured that, maybe the station used to play hip-hop and left well enough alone. I mean, a radio station changing up its programming from one type of music to another over the course of time is anything but unheard of. He then went to explain that from the time he first mentioned the station, his coworker became more and more disorderly and uncouth. I assured him that I was in no way acting out of character, and that there was nothing to worry about. This seemed to de-escalate the conversation to a good stopping point, and that was the last we talked about it. The rest of the trip went off without a hitch, but I could tell that something was deeply bothering Terry. When I got home from my camping trip, 3 days later, I went straight to researching the names I'd recently heard. I found out that all of them went missing in the same exact manner as the previous people, except for George Wellingsworth, who went missing well before cars were even invented. However, the research I did on him turned out to be one of the most fruitful yet. It was tough, as you could imagine, to dig up information on somebody who lived so long ago, but what I learned about him really stuck with me. Firstly, he was an Englishman. Secondly, he was viewed as something of a social pariah. Apparently, he was seen as the town nuisance. Allegedly, he heard noises in his head that he described as being a fuzzy ruckus. One night, after yet having another one of his episodes, he gathered up some of his belongings, put them in a stagecoach, and set off into the night, never to be seen or heard from again. I mean, how weird is that? That even though he lived well before the invention of the automobile, or the radio for that matter, his story was strangely congruent to all the other people mentioned on AM 1060. Just his was the 17th century version. Just then, my wife came downstairs in a hurry as she was late for work, saw me sitting on the couch using her laptop again. She half-jokingly asked if I was trying to win her more tickets, and I sheepishly said that I was, having forgotten that that was the lie I was going with to explain my sudden and strange change of habits. What happened next, however, left me very confused. Right before she left, she told me that she listened to AM 1060 on her way home from work the previous day. Fearing the worst, I had readied some cockamamie explanation as to why all she heard was either static, talk radio, rock music, or worse yet, missing persons reports, but that was before she said that I was right, and that it did have a pretty good selection of pop and R&B music, which confused me even further, as I had never heard any pop or R&B on that station. I get that the station by nature is rather anomalistic, but this threw me for a loop. Is the station different things to different people? The following night, I was driving home from work when I turned on the radio. I flipped over to AM 1060, only to hear complete and utter silence. Well, this is new, I thought. As I was about to change the station, I got a call, answered the phone, and it was Terry. No idea why he was calling me this early, but whatever. We chatted for a couple of minutes, talking about this and that, when almost as if he had telekinetic powers, he asked if I was currently listening to AM 1060. I lied and said that I wasn't, although there was nothing currently playing on the channel, so I guess it wasn't a total lie. He said he was just making sure, and laid his theory on that the radio station was pure evil, or something to that effect. And I laughed because, while I found the station intriguing at best and somewhat perturbing at worst, I really doubted that it was run by the devil. The topic quickly changed to that of work. Apparently, another person from Terry's work quit that week. Right after telling me that, a sudden urge came over me. I asked him what the name of his coworker who had become enraptured by AM 1060 was. He said that his coworker went by the name Manny, but that his real name was Armando Gonzalez. I quickly found an excuse to end the call with Terry, spinning some story about pulling into a drive-thru to grab a bite to eat before I got home. I assured him that I would call him later, and we hung up. Almost like clockwork, the second I hung up, the music began to fade over the radio. This time started off innocently enough, beginning with a song, that song being My Favorite Wasted Time by Owen Paul. I chuckled to myself. How apropos, I thought. Since this radio station had truly become something of my favorite wasted time these past couple months. As the song petered out, static faded in, and then the 3 beeps. Here we go again, I said out loud. Then came something that I was definitely not expecting. Something that made my blood run ice cold.
James Agger, born April 10th, 1961. Date missing, August 17th, 2016.
That's my name. That's my birth date, and today is August 17th, 2016. And as you guys can read by the title of this video, this is a creepypasta that goes by the name of AM 1060. If you like what you heard, please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and tune in next time. I like to do these sometimes. Also, in the description will be links to the original post. Also, sources to any music or whatever. Okay, I'll see y'all later.